folks, and welcome to They Might Be Homesteading. Today we are starting a special series. We have an opportunity to build a permaculture landscape from scratch, and this is not something I get the opportunity to do very frequently, but as you can see behind me, I have a house that was built roughly 10 years ago, and out back here nothing has been done with the landscape other than to acquire some stuff over time. So what we've done is we've designed a landscape that will fit this property as well as the desires of the owners, and we will go ahead and help them build up this property to be able to not only give them somewhere to go during the day, but also to provide food for their table at night. So over in this area here, this is the western side of the house. You can see the sun is about 11 a.m. right now. It's February, so the sun's low. But this wall gets an excessive amount of heat, so we have a master bedroom back here that tends to pick up a lot of late afternoon heat. In addition to that, we've got the garage at the other end, and we've got this nice wide swath. So in throughout here, we're going to plant a very small orchard. In addition to that orchard, what we're going to do is build a green wall out of grapes, and they will shade this side of the house and help with the heat gain. Now up in this area, up in here, we're going to extend their patio out to give them much more livable space. So it's not necessarily permaculture related, it's basically being able to live outdoors and use your yard effectively. As we come around this side of the property, as you can see, we've got a bit of a grade in through here as it drops off. This is the original construction grade. Now when you're doing anything outside, you do need to maintain a grade for rain runoff, but it does not need to be quite this, well, severe. So we're going to have to infill some of this, and then what we will do is we will have the extended patio here. We're going to continue the grape theme across this area of the block wall by using trellises built into the block wall. There's a little boy here and hopefully a little dog soon, so they're going to get a nice grass area to play in. And then as we get down to this end of the yard, one of the big desires is to put in a large gazebo. So we will have a very large gazebo, and then over here in this corner of the yard, my assistant is building up what will be the vegetable patch. And that will give them enough growing space to basically grow any vegetables they'd want in a year. So there's really a lot of work to do here. So the first step of this job, now that we've designed the landscape, is to go and mark all the areas where we're going to work and get the foundational stuff going. That's why there's a big ditch witch behind me, because the first thing we need to do is we need to mark and trench for water, and we're also going to provide power to the gazebo. We also need to provide power to the valves in our sprinkler systems, because all of the watering out here will be automated. The whole point is to build it and leave it alone, and all you have to do is periodic maintenance. So for right now, I'm going to go grab my tools and we're going to start marking, and we'll be back with you later.
Now, I'll be the first to admit that renting a trencher is serious business. Anytime you use a power tool, it must be respected. It should not be feared, but it must be respected. In this case, we were able to go to our local big box store, rent one of these. We provided a full safety instruction on the tool and a full tutorial on how to use it properly. So, despite the fact that it's a fairly large piece of equipment and it is conceivably fairly dangerous, as a trencher is basically an enormous chainsaw that digs through the earth, they're not things that you should be afraid of or really concerned about renting, other than understanding how they work. Here you can see me trenching through the backyard, and due to the quality of the soil that I'm digging through, you can see that there's a fair amount of wrestling involved, at least when things are the way they are here. But overall, it was not, in the realm of things, much different than running a lawnmower. So the main things to know when you're going to go rent a piece of equipment is, number one, how do I use this safely? Number two, how do I use this efficiently? And with a little bit of training, it's, you know, any one of these tools is very, very easy to use. And the one tip I will give you on trenchers is if you have bad soil, the bigger the trencher, the less you will get tossed about. So rent the big trencher, not the little trencher when you go to get one.
So now that we've finished digging all the trenches for our irrigation, it's time to start building the system out. Now, there are about as many different configurations for irrigation systems as you can basically devise. So I'm not going to go into details on the infinite number of them. Instead, I will describe how we set ours up. So when you're stubbing out, what I really like to use is Schedule 40 half-inch PVC. It's good and it's strong. It will, Schedule 40 will basically last forever. If you get the thin-walled stuff and you go digging in your garden, you could accidentally snap it very easily. Schedule 40 will not crack like that. And what we want to do is simply get our runs in. And so I start at the furthest point, leave a nice tall stub out. That way I know exactly where everything's coming out of the ground. And we can adjust it to whatever watering system we're putting in. And the other nice thing about the PVC is it doesn't require any really heavy-duty specialty tools. I've got a set of PVC shears, a pipe scraper, and some Christie's hot glue. And I specifically use the Christie's brand because of the quality. You know, there are very few things that I will recommend by name, but this stuff is one of them. And we simply go along, and for each area that I will have irrigation coming out of the ground, we'll leave a stub out. And so in these sections that are in between two main pipes, we use a slip T fitting. For end joints, we use a 90-degree elbow. And one of the things that I think I enjoy the most about this part is basically after being tossed about by the trencher for a good couple of hours, this is a lot less intensive on the body. And the only real trick is just to keep everything aligned the same way. Now, when you're mating these together, you want to make sure they're good and scored up, because that will provide extra surface for the glue to adhere to, and then push them together as best as possible. And so we've got roughly about 200 feet worth of this to run. So we'll start doing that. The other thing that works really well with this is if you've got a helper, is you can have them backfill the trenches after you go through. It'll start to stabilize the system for you and make it easier to lay more stuff in. So, like I said, we got about 200 feet of this stuff to run, so we'll go ahead and get started with it. Okay. So right now we're about midway through our second day of work, and it still doesn't really look like a lot has been accomplished, but you know, you'd be surprised how much we've gotten done. So we've got basically the full lay of the land done now. This piece here that's marked off is eventually going to hold a swing set. So we're going to raise that up, and that'll be nice and level for the swing set. Over here there's an old construction dirt pile that was left. Because we have grading issues, we've been shifting this big huge dirt pile from one end of the yard to the other. And the other piece has been finishing off doing the irrigation. So one of the things is this does take a while to run, and then I'm going to have to tie into the tap over there to get a water supply, as well as at this side of the property we are going to have our valve manifold over here and the controller on the wall. And so we'll go through the details of how to go ahead and put that together. As I said, you know, we had grade issues. So right here is basically where the gazebo is going to go. We've been pulling the earth across, laying it in. When you've got stuff like this caliche, to give you an idea of how hard this stuff really is, and this is mainly for folks who don't live in Arizona. So, for all intents and purposes, this is a rock. I mean, ugh, I can barely break it apart, but what it is it's really, really heavy clays. And this is what causes us all of our drainage problems here, as well as gives us very, very infertile soil. So, we're using this because in particular, because it will tamp down very heavily, it'll become a concrete-like surface that we can then put sand and pavers over top. The other thing that we did at the end of the day yesterday is wherever you stir up earth, you want to wet it down afterwards. Number one, because it cuts down on dust, but number two, it helps with compaction. So you can either sit here with a tamper and continue to tamp this ground down, or you can give it a good soak in the evening and let children run over it all the next day, and you can see the furrows from the kids running around. But as I said, we're moving on. The rest of the day today will be completing the initial phase of putting in the irrigation system, so we will be done tying into water. The other thing will be to basically have the pile over there, as well as marking out the area for the swing set, so that we have all of our major land areas marked, so that the next phase of bringing in the pavers and bringing in the fill soil for the various different areas, it'll be just straightforward, bring it in, dump it where it needs to go, and then eventually we'll be able to lay rock and grass over it. So this right here is the master water shutoff for the house. It's very important that you know where this is on your home, and what this allows us to do is basically shut off all the water for the house. When you start working with outside plumbing, like hose bibs and that sort of thing, generally they are source fed directly from your main line, and so there is nowhere inside the house where you can shut a valve off to close it off before you start working. So you can sometimes cheat and use a big pair of pliers. This is just a tool you can get at most big box stores that will allow you to shut off the water. And the trick is, well, there's no handle on this one. So once you've got it all shut off, basically go inside and just open up a couple of the taps in the house to relieve the pressure. That'll take all the water out of the plumbing that's above the hose bib, and then when we go outside, we'll do a final drain. So we're ready to start tying into the existing plumbing and start being able to hook up our new irrigation. So here we've got the primary hose bib on the back of the house, and this was originally sweat soldered on, so we're going to have to remove it. And basically we've got the water shut off in the front. I got a couple of faucets open inside the house, so we got plenty of air coming through, and you can see the hose is completely on. It's just dribbling out a little bit. And what we need to do is basically heat this up until the existing seal gets soft and will come apart. And since there is water in the pipes, this may take a little bit of time. Now this is one of those tasks where, you know, you are running into an area where you can get yourself into serious trouble. So if you are not comfortable with the idea of sweating your own plumbing, number one, I strongly recommend that you try it on, you know, you can go anywhere and get a couple of copper fittings and just try to make your own pieces. But this is the sort of thing that you can either find a friend who's more familiar with it or hire a plumber to do the final tie-in for you. At least with doing most of the rest of the work, you've saved most of the labor costs and you've just got this one small piece to do. And there we go. That's one of those things that when it comes, it comes. It's just, oh, and there is the water that was keeping it from coming out. One of the things about plumbing is that water conducts heat a heck of a lot better than air does. So anytime you have any water remaining in your pipe, it's going to be that much harder to get seals either to seal or to become unsealed. So we're going to let this drain for a little bit, and while that's draining, and this is still a little bit soft, get this cleaned up. Because basically, just like what we did with the PVC pipe, you need to do the same sort of cleaning with a copper pipe. Okay, so we let everything cool for a minute or two. You can see I'm getting a good etch on the pipe. I'm also doing the same on the inside. Now, this is a special piece that I fabricated for this particular project because we need to retain the hose bib, which will go on here, as well as create the supply line. So I've got that. And what I'm going to do next is, this is soldering flux. You want to put that on the surfaces before you heat it up, and then go ahead and press the two pieces together. There we go. I got it nicely lined up, straight up and down. So the next step is to get the torch lit. And just like we heated this up to get the old piece off, we're going to heat it up to seal the new piece on. The difference being is that we will actually create the seal with some lead-free silver solder. And so you might want to come in a little bit closer to see this, because the interesting thing is that when you heat this up, number one, you'll start to see, and it might, if you come in from the side a little bit so you can see the same perspective, you'll hear the flux melting and boiling away. It's an acid etch. It's cleaning the surfaces. And then, whoop, okay, there we go. So then, you'll know it's at the right temperature when you touch the solder to the copper, and the solder immediately melts. And what will actually occur is the heat will draw the solder up into, there we go. It will actually cause the solder to wick up into the area between the two seals, and that's what will create the seal between the two pieces of copper. At that point in time, once it cools, it will be perfectly sealed. Now, as that's cooling, so we've got this piece down here is a standard 1/2 inch male threaded. So that will connect down into our supply line that runs over to the irrigation. That is a standard hose bib configuration. And for anyone that has little boys, they know that little boys like to flood backyards with hoses. So for this particular project, we picked up one of these. These are like the ones you see at schools. It's got a key that goes in the top, kind of like an old roller skate key. And basically that's the only way to turn it on and off. So it is very child unfriendly, which in our case is a good thing. So we're going to let this unit cool. Then we're going to put some Teflon tape there, and we'll put the new hose bib on. We'll put the new piece in here, and I'll show you how we tie it into the rest of the system. Okay, so I've already put the new hose bib on the top. The next bit that I want to do is get this on the bottom. So I've used some Teflon tape on these threads. That will help ensure that there's no leaks. And when you're threading these, I find if you attach the drop pipe first, it generally makes things a bit easier. And depending on your hand strength, if you can't do that, you use just a pair of channel lock pliers to finish tightening it. Now, one thing that people frequently forget to do when they add a new plumbing system, whether it's in the house or it's outside or it's anywhere, is to put a master shutoff. And so one of the most important pieces of this entire irrigation system is this one little guy right here. And what it will allow us to do is basically shut off the entire system in the case of an emergency. So, for example, when we started this, we had to go out to the street to turn it off at the street, which means there's no water in the house, there's no water anywhere. But let's say we're out here working on the irrigation, we want to change a few sprinkler heads, that sort of thing. All you have to do is turn this off and boom, you're done. So it makes things a heck of a lot easier. And then basically the final bit after this is you simply excavate straight down and you take your 1/2 inch pipe and an elbow and it goes into the trench. And so here you've made your water add-on. Now the other nice thing right here is you can now test whether or not all of these seals are watertight. With the hose bib closed and with your valve closed, you should be able to turn the water on at the street and not see anything here. If you see any dripping or leaking here, that means there's a problem and you need to take it apart and redo it. And then pick up all your stuff and move on to the next stage. So this is the last major piece of doing the irrigation plumbing, and this is setting up the valves. So what that does is this gives you a means of controlling when your water comes on and off to water the various different areas in your yard. So all that plumbing that we set out across the yard all comes to this one point, your supply line and all your output lines. So this is just a basic irrigation valve box you can buy anywhere. I can see I've cut into it in a couple of different places, just cut it with a Sawzall so it would match my specific configuration. Now what we've got underneath is a valve manifold. And so what I've done here is I built a small manifold that holds the 4 valves. So I've got one for the garden, one for to wrap around the property, one for the grass, and one for the trees. And now the way that I like to do this is I actually cut and dry fit the whole assembly before I glue it together. So before, when I was just prepping, cutting, and gluing, that's one thing, but because you need to have everything sort of fit the right way, in this, you really want to make sure it all fits ahead of time. So you can see, for example, here, this all still moves. So once I've got my placement correct, then I take each piece apart and I glue it. And then at that point in time, once all of that's glued and the valves are shut, you can turn on your water supply and run all the way up to the valves. We're running out of time this weekend, our first weekend on the project. So next time we'll be actually adding the control box for the valves. Seeing as we don't really have anything to water yet, it's not actually a big deal whether or not we're running them. But again, the best thing you can possibly do here is dry fit and then glue. That way you will be certain that this will turn out exactly the way you want it to, and you won't be stuck doing a whole lot of last minute cutting and adjusting and farting around. So I'm going to go ahead and glue this, and we'll basically be done for the first weekend.